Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The fluorescent hum was a constant companion, a flat, electric drone that had long ago ceased to register as sound and instead manifested as a persistent pressure behind Arthur's eyeballs. It was 2:17 a.m. Outside, the city was a tapestry of distant, muted lights, utterly indifferent to the sterile vigil he kept within the glass and steel husk of the Solstice Tower. Arthur, a man whose life had become a predictable rhythm of coffee, patrols, and the hypnotic flicker of surveillance monitors, adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the main screen. 24 feeds glowed back at him, a grid of silent, static worlds. Hallways stretched into engineered infinities, conference rooms sat in stoic repose, lobbies gleamed under emergency lights. Nothing ever happened at 2:17 a.m., not really. He'd been doing this for 7 years, ever since the recession had eaten his modest print shop and spat him out into the churning maw of the gig economy, eventually settling him here, a sentinel against phantoms and the occasional overzealous cleaning crew. He knew every blind spot, every camera anomaly, every shadow that played tricks in the periphery. He was good at his job, he was thorough, and right now something was gnawing at the edge of that thoroughness. It had started subtly, a week ago. A chair in the fifth-floor break room, specifically camera 5B, facing the window. He'd sworn it was angled slightly differently than he'd left it after his last patrol. He'd dismissed it as an error of memory, the kind of minor brain hiccup common to men approaching 60. Then, a few nights later, the same chair, but this time in camera 5A, facing the door. He'd gone up, checked it himself, found it perfectly aligned. He'd even nudged it into the wrong position just to prove he wasn't crazy, then corrected it. The next night it was back, subtly askew, a silent, almost imperceptible challenge. He kept meticulous logs, not just for official reports, but for himself. A habit from his print shop days, a need for order in a chaotic world. Date, time, camera ID, observation. He'd started a separate, private log titled Anomalies. The chair incident was entry number 1. Now, as the digital clock in the corner of his screen flickered to 2:18 a.m., a different anomaly presented itself. Camera 7C, an angle on the executive boardroom. A whiteboard marker, usually nestled in its tray beneath the board, was lying flat on the polished table, directly beneath the word strategy. He hadn't been on the 7th floor on his last round. No one had. The building was empty, locked down. He zoomed in. It was definitely the marker. Red, it bothered him. It was too precise, too deliberate for a random occurrence. A draft couldn't lift it from a tray and place it neatly on a table. He made a note in his physical logbook, then opened the digital anomalies file on his desktop. Camera 7C, 2:18 a.m., red whiteboard marker moved from tray to table, no visible presence. He felt a familiar prickle of unease, a sensation he was becoming too acquainted with. The next few shifts saw the anomalies multiply. A stack of paper reams in the supply closet on the 3rd floor, camera 3D would shift, sometimes growing taller, sometimes shorter, never quite right. A potted plant in the reception area, camera 1A, would rotate slowly, imperceptibly, over the course of an hour, only to be perfectly aligned again on his next patrol. He tried to catch it in the act, constantly flipping between cameras, rewinding footage, but it was always just outside the frame, or the specific moment was lost in a blur of digital static that seemed to happen only on that particular feed. He started developing theories: air currents, magnetic interference, unsettled foundations. Each one felt flimsier than the last. The movements weren't random, they felt intentional. They were subtle, yes, but they were there. And they were messing with him. The first truly impossible pattern revealed itself on Thursday night, a cold, drizzly affair that pressed the silence of the city in on the tower. Arthur was on his 3rd coffee, eyes gritty, when camera 6B, showing a long, empty corridor, flickered. When it stabilized, a framed picture on the wall, a generic landscape print, was tilted at a precise 45-degree angle. He scribbled it down. 10 minutes later, on camera 6D, another picture, further down the same corridor, was tilted at the exact same angle. Then 6E, 6F, all the pictures on the 6th floor corridor in quick succession, tilted precisely. He rewound the footage, heart thudding a slow, heavy beat against his ribs. Nothing, no one, the pictures simply shifted. One moment straight, the next, tilted. No visible hands, no shadow, no gust of wind. The transitions were instant, like a frame missing from a film reel replaced by an altered one. He went up. The corridor was silent, cold. The pictures were all perfectly straight. He ran his hand over them, solidly fixed, no wires loose, no signs of tampering. When he returned to the security room, 6B flickered again. The picture was now tilted once more. He stared at it, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. He wasn't seeing things. He spent the rest of the night in a state of hyper-alertness, his gaze darting between the 24 screens. His focus sharpened, his mind, usually dulled by routine, now a razor's edge. And then he saw it. Camera 4A, an empty office, neatly arranged. A desk, a chair, a bookshelf. On the bookshelf, a small, ceramic owl figurine. At 3:41 a.m., the owl was facing left. At 3:42 a.m., it was facing right. Camera 4C, an office 2 doors down. A different figurine, a glass paperweight shaped like a whale. At 3:43 a.m., the whale was at the center of the desk. At 3:44 a.m., it was at the edge, perilously close to falling. It wasn't random, it was a sequence. The chair, the marker, the papers, the plant, the pictures, the figurines, they were all small, movable objects, and they were being moved. But by whom, or what, and how? The impossible patterns started to become more intricate. He noticed a sequence of lights turning on and off in different offices, forming a kind of Morse code. 3 short flashes on the 10th floor, camera 10B, then 2 long flashes on the 9th, camera 9D, then 1 short flash on the 8th, camera 8A. He tried to decode it, scribbling down dots and dashes, but it never made coherent sense. It was more like an attempt at communication, or a child's game of I Spy. He felt himself sliding into an obsession. Sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford, lest he miss a crucial moment. He brought a thermos of strong coffee, energy drinks, and a small, battery-powered radio for background noise, anything to fight the encroaching silence and the oppressive feeling of being alone. He started talking to himself, muttering observations, narrating the silent movements on the screens. One evening, exhausted and wired, he saw it. Camera 12F, a rarely used server room, filled with the ominous blink of indicator lights. A dust mote danced in the single beam of light from the emergency exit sign, and in that dust, for a split second, a distortion, not a shadow, not a glitch, a ripple, like water disturbed but in the air. It elongated, then snapped back, and a server rack that had been angled slightly inwards was now perfectly flush with the wall. He froze, heart pounding. He rewound the footage, frame by frame. Nothing. The ripple was gone. The rack was flush. He played it forward again in real time. It was there, the brief distortion. He saw it. He wasn't imagining it. It was like a flaw in the fabric of reality itself. He tried to explain it to Gary, his morning relief. Gary, a burly man with a perpetually skeptical expression and a penchant for conspiracy theories about alien abductions, listened patiently, then patted Arthur's shoulder. Lack of sleep, Art, happens to the best of us. Take a couple of days off, get some rest. Arthur tried to show him the anomalies log, the rewound footage. Gary squinted at the screen. Looks like static to me, Art. These old cameras, they play up. He glanced at Arthur's bleary eyes. Seriously, you look like death warmed over. Go home. The dismissal stung, but it also solidified something within Arthur. No one would believe him. He was on his own. The patterns, the movements, the ripples, they were for him and him alone. The entities, for that's what he now called them, seemed to revel in his solitary awareness. They grew bolder. A specific camera, 14A, showing a small, unused meeting room, became their primary stage. First, the blinds would go up, then down. Then the projector would cycle on, briefly displaying a blank white screen, then off. Then a stack of chairs would arrange themselves into a strange, geometric pattern, a pyramid or a spiral. He started feeling their presence more acutely. It wasn't a cold spot or a whisper or any of the cliché supernatural signs. It was a pressure and awareness that seeped into the security room, thickening the air, making the hair on his arms stand on end. He felt like a lab rat in an experiment, being watched, being tested, being played with. One night, the patterns on camera 14A stopped. Arthur waited tense, his eyes burning. Then in the center of the blank projector screen, a single black pixel appeared, then another, then more, forming a shape. Slowly, agonizingly, they coalesced into a crude, almost childish drawing. A stick figure. Its arms were raised. It seemed to be waving. Arthur gasped, a strangled sound in the silent room. He zoomed in, his hand shaking. It was definitely a stick figure, waving at him. The figure dissolved, and the screen went blank again. He stared at the empty screen, then slowly, hesitantly, he raised his own hand and waved back. He felt foolish, insane, but he couldn't help it. It was a response, a desperate plea for connection in a world that had become entirely alien. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then on camera 14A, the blinds raised and lowered once, twice, 3 times. A nod, a confirmation. He wasn't alone, and whatever was doing this knew he was watching, and knew he'd waved. The game changed after that. The anomalies weren't just movements anymore. They became directed. They led him. He would see a specific book fall off a shelf on camera 2D, then a light flicker in the adjacent room on camera 2E, then a specific folder on a desk in camera 2F would slide open. It was a trail, a breadcrumb path of impossibility. He started following them on the screens. He would rewind, observe the sequence, identify the next step, then fast forward, waiting. One evening, the trail led him to the rarely used executive washroom on the 18th floor, camera 18A. The feed showed the door slowly swinging open, revealing a pristine, marble-tiled interior. Then the reflection in the polished chrome faucet distorted, briefly showing something tall and attenuated before snapping back to normal. A clear, deliberate image. Arthur swallowed, his mouth dry. This was it. The entities were calling him. They wanted him to come up. The thought terrified him. His job was to stay in the security room to monitor. To leave was to break his cardinal rule, to abandon his post. But the compulsion was overwhelming. The need to know, to understand what was behind these impossible patterns, gnawed at him. He needed answers. His sanity demanded it. He stood up, his joints protesting with a chorus of creaks. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and his patrol keys. The security room felt suddenly claustrophobic, the screens a mocking chorus of silent observation. He locked the door behind him, an absurd gesture of security in a building he now knew was fundamentally insecure. The ascent in the elevator was agonizingly slow. Each floor that passed felt like a step deeper into an unknown abyss. The elevator hummed, a louder, more direct version of the constant hum in the security room, and Arthur realized with a chill that the hum of the building was the sound of its blood, its nervous system. He was inside a living thing. He stepped out onto the 18th floor. The air was colder here even though the heating was on. The emergency lights cast long, stark shadows. The silence was absolute, heavier than any silence he'd ever known. He felt like he was walking into a sound vacuum. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, dancing over polished marble floors and dark wood paneling. He found the executive washroom. The door was just as the camera had shown, slightly ajar. He pushed it open fully. The room was empty, spotless. The chrome faucet gleamed. He leaned over it, peering at his own distorted reflection. He waited, holding his breath, for the ripple, for the elongated figure. Nothing. He felt a surge of disappointment mixed with a sickening wave of self-doubt. Had he imagined it? Was Gary right? Was he finally losing it? He turned to leave, but as he did, his foot slipped on something small and hard. He looked down. It was a single crimson whiteboard marker, the same shade of red as the one from the 7th floor boardroom. He picked it up. It was cold. Then he noticed, on the pristine white tile wall just above the sink, a message had been written. In faint, almost transparent red, "Hello, Arthur." His blood ran cold. The marker had no cap. It was dry. It couldn't have written that. He touched the faint script. It was smooth, as if etched into the tile itself, not drawn on it. He backed away, clutching the marker like a talisman. This wasn't a trick of light, or a faulty camera, or his tired mind. This was real. And it was speaking to him. He fled, not in a panic, but with a terrible, chilling certainty. Back in the elevator, he pressed the lobby button, needing the relative safety of his security station. As the doors hissed shut, he glanced at the emergency panel. The floor numbers glowed: 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13. Then, for a split second, an extra number flashed, between 13 and 12, a 0. Then it vanished. He stumbled into the security room, heart hammering, and slammed the door shut, locking it with frantic hands. He collapsed into his chair, eyes wide, staring at the grid of monitors. He knew. He knew what the impossible patterns were. They were the building's thoughts, its dreams, its communications. The tower wasn't just glass and steel. It was a vast, sentient being stirring from a long, artificial sleep, and it had chosen him. He looked at the small, dry, red marker in his hand. He looked at the screens. He looked at the camera feeds. On camera 14A, the empty meeting room, the projector screen was now displaying something else, not a stick figure. A complex diagram, lines connecting floors, rooms, cameras. It was a map, his map, and at its center a flashing red dot, right where the security room was. And then on the small screen of his own monitor, the one showing the feed from inside the security room, his own face appeared. Pale, terrified, reflected in the screens before him, and then slowly a black pixel appeared on his cheek, then another. They began to coalesce, forming a shape, a tiny red stick figure, waving. He looked at his hand, still clutching the marker. He looked at the screen, at the tiny red figure on his reflection's cheek. He felt a profound, terrible understanding dawn on him. He was part of the pattern now. He was not just the observer, he was being observed. He was being written into the tower's story. The invisible entities weren't just moving things, they were moving him. He put the red marker down on his desk. It rolled just a fraction, then stopped. He watched it, mesmerized. Then he picked it up again. And with a hand that was no longer shaking, he began to draw, on a blank sheet of paper, the pattern he had just seen on his own reflection. A stick figure, waving. He was learning their language. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to deepen, to throb with a new, resonant energy. He heard a faint creak from the corridor outside, just beyond the locked door of the security room. He glanced at the monitor showing the corridor camera. Nothing, but he knew it wasn't nothing. He knew what the impossible patterns meant. He was no longer a security guard. He was a piece on the board. A player in the tower's endless, silent game, and the game had only just begun. The glow of the monitors reflected in his eyes, now wide, no longer with fear, but with a terrible, knowing acceptance. He finally understood.